Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're talking today about how communities are using by name list data to end homelessness, and we have a really great panel. So I am excited to hear from everyone, including people who are participating. Really encourage folks to use the chat to connect with one another, ask questions, share your thoughts as we go along. I find it really bizarre to just be like speaking at a screen and not be able to see you guys. So I appreciate when there's some like chatter in the chat box, so I know that folks are out there. Let's see. I am going to get started today just with a land acknowledgement. I'm coming to you today from Guelph, Ontario. So I'm currently occupying the ancestral lands of the Attawandaron, the Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee peoples, and the treaty lands and territory in the Mississaugas of the Credit. And I would love to know where all of you folks are coming from today. And if you happen to know about the lands that you're on, if you want to pop that into the chat as well. Good practice for us to reflect and acknowledge the land that we work and live on. I keep hitting my arrow, that's not happening. All right, so I am supposed to do a little bit of housekeeping before I get started. These are standard slides in our deck, just to let you know that this is brought to you by the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. And we have a bunch of different initiatives happening in our work. We are looking forward to a conference in 2021. It will be virtual, although it says join us in Toronto for the 2021. Is it virtual? Lisa, I feel like you better correct me.
It's virtual, yeah.
It is virtual. Okay, I got really excited that I might see people in person for a second. No one had told me, but it is virtual. Okay. We also have Built for Zero Canada, and all of our communities, or all of our panelists that are participating today, are part of Built for Zero Canada. We have the training and technical assistance, which is helping communities and orgs setting up coordinated access by name lists, doing training, meeting all of your training needs. We have our amazing group of allied networks that I really encourage folks to visit our website. You'll be able to find all the allied networks there. They're doing incredible work, particularly at this time during the pandemic, really pushing on advocacy and identifying the needs that are out there at a local level and the policy changes that are required. And of course, we do lots of advocacy work too to our federal and provincial friends about the changes that are needed to end homelessness. These webinars happen monthly, and you can sign up for them on the TTA website, which is on the right-hand side there, training.caeh.ca. It will tell you all of the upcoming webinars that we have going on if you want to register. And you can also see the webinar archive, which will have the recording of today's webinar and the slide deck in there as well. And finally, this webinar series is funded through the Government of Canada through the CCI funding stream of Reaching Home. We like our friends over at Reaching Home, working with them closely, developing strategies around ending homelessness, and we're super pleased to have their support to run this webinar series. Last bit of housekeeping. I feel totally ridiculous telling you how to use Zoom because I barely have it figured out, even though we're a year into this pandemic and I should be an expert. But wanted folks to know that we are recording the webinar. You'll get a copy of it in a couple of days, and I showed you where you can find it on the TTA website. Everyone's muted. Please use the chat. You can also use the Q&A to ask questions. My awesome colleague Lisa is going to help moderate that because I can not so awesome at multitasking. Okay, I should introduce myself. So my name is Randalin. I'm the director Data and Policy at the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. As I mentioned, based here in Guelph. My email address is there in case you want to chat with me after the webinar. Always love to hear your ideas or thoughts. I like to engage in some conversation. I have the most awesome panel, and I am not going to tell you too much about them. I think if they want to share a little bit more, they can when they start speaking. But I just want to say, like, I feel really super privileged to have this awesome panel today. Some of my favorite people that I've met through the Built for Zero campaign. We have Chris Gorman coming at us from St. John, Erin Forrest from Peterborough, and look at her rocking her CAEH mask, and Dominica McPherson from Guelph and Wellington Task Force for Poverty Elimination. So super excited to have those panelists join us and share some of their experiences. But before I let them talk, I am going to just say a little bit about homeless data. So we're talking about how by name lists can support communities to reduce homelessness. And I think we're in this really unique place with homeless data. In the past, and it's still with us, communities were really encouraged to benchmark their goals against anonymous snapshot data collected at a single point in time, so otherwise known as a point in time count. So I say they're still with us because the feds are requiring us to do them. If you're reaching home funded community, provinces are requiring communities to do them. And they are a useful tool in some ways. I mean, they can increase awareness about homelessness at a local level. They can engage community volunteers if you're partnering or you're pairing your PIT count with a registry week. And it's also a very useful tool for informing policy. But it is limited. There are lots of limitations with PIT counts that have been lots of folks acknowledging those. And so we're starting to see communities shift over to by name lists that support coordinated access and prioritization at a household level, and also increase our understanding of homeless inflow and outflow at a system level. And so that's your by name list. And then I think where we're moving to is this future state of communities analyzing and visualizing data to actually drive reduction focused decisions and identify and measure quality improvements. And I think our three panelists today are really going to show you how they are doing that future work. And I have a poll to launch. Oh, here we go. Figured it out, guys. Okay, so I'm going to launch this poll because I'm just curious where folks are at. So I have a couple questions about PIT counts. So I have launched that poll. Is that working, Lisa? Here we go. I see it. It's happening. So folks can go ahead and put their answers in, although no one's voted, so I'm wondering what's happening. Oh, here we go. It's happening. First question asking if communities have conducted a point in time count in the past 2 years. I know a lot of communities are planning to conduct them in 2021. And we look like we have an experienced group of PIT enumerators, with 70% of folks having completed it, but also folks that are new to the PIT process. Also asked if your community has completed a PIT count, how useful was it for driving and measuring reductions at a local level? And so very small group of folks, 9% say it's very useful, but 40% useful, 39% somewhat useful, and 14% not useful. And then that last question, if your community has completed a PIT count, how useful was it for increasing awareness about homelessness and engaging partners in meaningful action to reduce homelessness? So pretty spread out there. We've got 30% saying very useful, 35% useful, 24% somewhat useful, and 11% not useful. So that's super interesting, gives you a sense of the experience of folks in doing PIT counts, but also in terms of the usefulness. Some of the points that I raised doesn't necessarily help us drive and measure reductions because they're typically done every couple of years. A lot can change within that time. And of course, the methodology that you use can really impact the consistency. But it can be helpful in raising awareness. All right, so I'm going to end that poll. I'm pretty impressed that I managed to pull that off. All right, so a little bit of information about by name lists. I think that folks are probably familiar with by name lists. This is the definition that is used on the Built for Zero website, and you're likely familiar with this little graphic, which is the basic information that a by name list is meant to capture. So your inflow is your 3 data points, folks who are newly identified, those who are returning from housing, and those who are returning from inactive. And then you have your number of active homeless, which is changing all the time. And then you have your 2 outflow points, which is your housing move-ins and move to inactive. So having this information in real time really gives you a sense of your inflow and outflow. And so it's not as stagnant as PIT count data. It is meant to be real time. With Built for Zero and the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness, we refer to by name list as quality by name list. And what we mean when it achieves quality is that we have validated the progress or the achievements of the community through different tools, like the by name list scorecard and the provider participation tool. And we also have improvement advisors who review that material to ensure that it's meeting consistent standards. And it's also a process of continuous improvement. So you may answer all of the questions on the by name list scorecard for basic, but we encourage communities to keep working on those advanced questions and to keep pushing to strengthen their by name list. So that's kind of on a very basic level. And I'm going to try to launch another poll to see where folks are with BNLs. So launching. All right, so first we're looking just to see if communities have established or they've started developing their by name list. If your community has a quality by name list. And if you do have a by name list, those same 2 questions we asked about the PIT. How useful for driving and measuring reductions, and how useful for increasing awareness. All right, so it looks like a really significant majority of folks have a by name list, about, oh, it's jumping all over, somewhere between 70 and 80% of folks on the call. In terms of quality, just about 50% have been confirmed by Built for Zero Canada. Other folks may not have gone through the confirmation process, but about 10% are confident that it's a quality BNL. And about 45% say not yet, so still in development, which is fantastic. And then in terms of using that by name list to drive and measure reductions, we have about 44% saying it is useful, 22% saying it's very useful. And then in terms of engaging partners in meaningful action to reduce homelessness, pretty spread out there. Majority look like they're in very useful and useful. So that's really good to know that folks are familiar with by name lists and they're working on the quality piece. And I hope that today's presenters will inspire you of ways that you can use that by name list to engage partners and also to drive and measure reductions. So I'm gonna end that. And then before I just pass it over to them, I do want to talk about data collection. I think that when communities get to the achievement of a quality by name list, it's a huge achievement. It's really exciting. A lot of work typically goes into getting to that state. And so where the challenge is you often get to that achievement and then think, okay, now what? And because I think our sector is in this interesting place where we're really starting to lean into data, but it hasn't necessarily been a consistent part of our practice in the past. We're just like in the beginning stages of leaning into it. And so we have all this data collected, but it's really useful unless we have at least these three things. So we have to have the skills to analyze it. And I think that our panelists today will show you that they have the skills, but also I think that they've developed those skills over the process of being engaged in the Built for Zero campaign and really leaning into by name lists. Data is also useless unless it's put into action. So if it's just sitting on a shelf somewhere, or you have numbers that only a couple people have access to, and it's not really being used to inform improvements or changes, then it's pretty useless. The other piece, data can be useless without visualization. So again, really sharing it out there, putting it in a way that's easy for folks to consume and to understand. All of these things can be new to folks in our sector. And so I think, it's just important to keep in mind that we're developing these three different skill sets. The other one I think is that I really like this quote, data is useless. Data stories, on the other hand, are very important, as most organizations are now drowning in data, but still haven't learned how to swim. And so again, we're new to data. There is so much data out there. It's difficult to digest it all. I think particularly in our sector, we are wanting to pair that data with stories to understand, oh, there's my dog, understand what's happening in a community and to personalize that data. And so data storytelling is something that we're really leaning into at CAEH and want to support folks to do the same. So I'm going to launch one more poll, and you will have an opportunity at the end to talk about, there'll be one more poll, but then we'll also send out a link where you can talk about what other information you might want to hear about. But I am just curious. So I'm going to launch this poll about kind of data related things you might want to learn more about. Right, so data things we might want to learn more about, data infrastructure, run charts, measuring improvements, one of my favorite topics, breaking down our 6 BNL data points, data collection, and data storytelling. Lots for that data storytelling one, which is really, really exciting. All right. Okay, so I am going to hand things over. We're going to start with Chris Gorman. So I am going to stop sharing, and I'm going to let Chris share if he wants to. No pressure.
I actually did put some slides together, so I think I'm going to share my screen, and I think the first one is just going to age me right away. let's see. Can everybody see that now?
Yep, we can see it. We can just see your presenter view, but that's okay. We can roll with that.
Well, that's not what I want you to see. How's that?
Perfect.
Okay. So we don't have too much time, each of us, so I will go through as quickly as I can. But first, before I say anything, I do want to acknowledge that my two co-workers, Kathy and Michael, are on this as well. And so I'm going to claim all of their great work as my own throughout this, but I do acknowledge that they do a little bit of work as well in New Brunswick. So I'll just throw that out there. So what I will go through is a quick overview of our numbers and then try to, as quickly as I can, dive into how we're using data to inform programming, policy, and a better understanding of public awareness of the issue of homelessness here in New Brunswick. And I'll focus mostly on St. John, but a lot of the work that we do is in the context of Moncton and Fredericton as well here in New Brunswick. So these are our numbers for the past year. So what we can see here, and thank you, Randalin, for creating all of these fantastic run charts for us. But we can see over the past year in St. John, we've managed to reduce our chronic homelessness numbers by about 30%. That's awesome. Huge wins there. A lot of work to get to a point where it was data we could trust and was reliable. And I would say that it's important to note that data is not what drives this success, but the frontline workers and the adherence to the by names list table really is what's allowed us to have these numbers. So now our job is to really dive into these as much as we can and improve them moving forward. So while there are huge successes in here, there are, I would say, challenges that come with these numbers as well. And a big piece of that, especially these days with everything going on, is that it's hard to say that you've made a 30% reduction in your chronic homelessness numbers when it doesn't feel that way at all for frontline agencies and frontline staff. So they're busier than ever dealing with really deep issues that people are facing, and that doesn't necessarily line up with this chart. So we know this chart is very specific to those who are chronically homeless and the reduction over the past year. And I don't think that most people aren't able to differentiate that throughout the run of a day of, I saw 50 clients come in who were, had deep needs, but maybe only 3 of them were chronically homeless. So it doesn't feel this way all the time, even though we can be proud of these numbers. It just doesn't always feel like we're in the midst of a big success right now. So this is basically the tool that anybody who uses the change package has access to. We just took it and changed the colors essentially. We do have a version of this that we're using actually as the clearinghouse for all of our data that captures all of these same data points, but not just for those who are chronically homeless. So it'd be all active homeless, and we're even trying to break things down, differentiate between those who like self-resolve versus those who are housed off of the BNL. But so what happened was over the past year or so, we started looking at these numbers, and we realized we've pretty much maxed out our housing resources and the rent supplements that we have access to. So we are averaging, I think it's 5.75 move-ins a month, but we're also seeing about that as far as newly identified people each month. So while we've made some gains, if we continue doing exactly what we're doing, we're going to stagnate pretty quick, and we're not going to see huge reductions moving forward. So we may break even, we may have a few less folks here and there, but we're not going to see big strategic changes like we want. So what that led us to do was really look at knowing that, with limited resources like most people have, we're not going to increase too much the amount of apartments we have access to, or case managers who can support folks moving in. So we're going to really look at our inflow and see if we can reduce the inflow onto the by names list. So like essentially stop people from being added to it, so that we can, without even increasing our move-ins, we can reduce our overall chronically homeless numbers. So what we saw in St. John over the past year was an average of about 6 new folks every month and an average of about 2 evictions every month. So that led us as a community to put some energy and effort into creating 2 different pilot programs that we're operating now. So we have a prevention pilot and a diversion pilot. And both of those are very strategically designed to reduce these numbers right here. So the prevention pilot, the cohort specifically that they are looking to prevent evictions with are folks who have been housed off of the BNL. So we know, just based on these small numbers, that if we can reduce the return from house even by 1 each month, that gets us moving in the right direction at a much quicker pace. And if we can reduce those newly identified folks, again, even just by 1 each month, then we would be have a -2 each month moving forward, and we're far, far, far better off and hitting functional zero, ending chronic homelessness much quicker. So we have no idea the impact of those programs yet. We're just piloting them, we're just testing them out, but we have a good amount of hope that this will create some big impact for us. So in addition to using the data to try to figure out where to put resources and focus attention for different programming, we also we're lucky in New Brunswick in that we have a quarterly, somewhat more frequent now, but at least a quarterly meeting with our provincial leadership, the NB leadership team on homelessness, and we've now moved those meetings to start with this data. So having those be completely data driven to drive the agenda of those meetings, it sets common language that everybody's speaking with. It really changes the focus of really being strategic and looking forward, using all of the right numbers. So this is a snapshot from one of the documents that we use in those meetings to drive the agenda. So we want our leaders in the province who are making big decisions to know all of the real numbers. And so this is a piece of that document. The other piece that would be a big part of it would be real-time HIFIS data. And so we want them to know, up-to-date shelter numbers and turnaway reports and things like that. But until recently, we had access to this data in our office, but it really lived with us. And as Randalin was mentioning earlier, data is useless if we're keeping it to ourselves. So we found a way to sort of build it into this agenda and use it to really create this shared understanding of what the problem is and what we can do to actually address it. So that's hopefully will have some big impact on policy. The other piece that we really want to focus on is again, not keeping the data to ourselves, but sharing it with the public as much as we can. So Kathy, who is on this webinar, put together an amazing quarterly newsletter. And this is part of a data snapshot from that newsletter. So really, I think, really easy to digest data. So we can see 80 people in St. John were actively experiencing homelessness last month. Of those, 50 were chronically homeless. And then just a little piece that between November and December, 15 people who were chronically homeless were housed. 10 people moved to inactive, 11 new people were identified as homeless, and 6 people returned from house. So really using the same language, but trying to break it down in, you know, an easy to understand infograph. And the other part of the newsletter was some good explanation of what these definitions and terms mean so that everybody could be on the same page. Now, again, Randalin mentioned this, I think the data is great. We sort of live in it all day long now. But I've not ever seen it move people quite the same way as when you pair it really well with an actual story. So this was included in there we go. This was included in the newsletter as well, which was a bright spot story about a client who had been housed off of the BNL. And pairing that with the data was super helpful. And I just added this in because we just got this email earlier today, but I wanted to not end with any piece on our actual data, but rather this really brief email that we saw. I know it's super big on the screen, but I'm just gonna let people read it because this to me is it's just beautiful. So that's all I really put together in slides, and I was hoping to save some time for questions, obviously. But I just think this last slide, like we spend so much time talking about numbers and data and the importance of it, and at least for me now, working from home, I feel a little bit removed from all of this. The day-to-day work, and so it can feel a little cold when you're just talking about numbers, even though it's all about real humans. So like to get this email today it was really good timing, and it's a good reminder of why the data matters so that we can do these things better and have more success stories.
That's awesome, Chris. Thank you so much for sharing that. Those colors are beautiful. Your newsletter looks fantastic. And thanks for ending on that happy note. That's a really great story. I'm going to push us through the panelists because we don't have a ton of time together today, and I want to make sure everyone gets a chance to talk. And if we have time at the end, we'll definitely have some time for questions, but also feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A, and the panelists can answer them as we go through. And I'll share their emails at the end as well. So I am going to ask Chris if you could stop sharing your screen, and then we will pass it. No, we will pass it over to Erin in Peterborough. If folks don't know Erin, she is one extremely fun. Oh, there's my doggo. He agrees. But she's also a HIFIS queen. Like, she is so talented with HIFIS, and yeah, if you have HIFIS questions, I'm sure she would love to chat about them. But I'll pass it over to you, Erin, to share what you have to say.
Thanks so much, Randalin, and thanks for providing us with a place to share our stories and experience with data and by name lists. I do love HIFIS, so if anyone has any HIFIS questions, you feel free to email me and I'll tell you what I know or don't know. Anyways, for those of you that I haven't had the opportunity to meet or talk to, I am the Homelessness System Data Administrator in Peterborough, and so part of my role is to deal with HIFIS and the by name list and all things related to data in the homelessness system. And so I do have a couple slides to share, but I'm going to give you a bit of background on our community before I get into those. I'm keeping a mind on the time, so everyone has a turn to talk, I promise. So we got HIFIS in 2017. And we had done a pit count in 2016, the year before. And then in 2018, we did a point in time count and registry week, which put us in a really great place to start our by name list, which we did in April of 2019. And then we reached quality by name list in November of 2019. That being said, even though we have a couple of years under our belt, we certainly don't have everything figured out. We have lots of interest in data, and we have a high capacity for quality data in our system, but we're still trying to work on, you know, what do we do with this information and how do we communicate it, either to the people who need to know and who can impact system changes, and then also to the broader community so they understand what we're working on. So I'm going to share my screen real quick. Hopefully I do this right. If I could get a thumbs up from somebody that they can see it. Great, thank you so much. Sorry, can you see my presentation and not my desktop? Yeah, okay, good, thank you. So the first thing we do is internally we go through the buckets. I call them that, even if not everyone calls them that, but that's what I call them. The monthly bucket review with our Built for Zero home team. We haven't necessarily had a lot of time to meet in the last little while, and I'm sure every community is feeling this sort of like COVID fatigue. We're all just kind of drowning, trying to figure out how to manage all that. But we do try to at least keep people notified of the data and how that's going in our community. And so I make sure to let our internal partners know basically what you see here on the screen. And so I actually expand on the chronic indicators to include our non-chronic total number and then our total number of people experiencing homelessness in Peterborough City and County. And although our focus is chronic homelessness and our goal is ending chronic homelessness, we do think it's important to at least acknowledge the overall scale to see how chronic fits into that. And so I apologize if it's too small to read, but essentially it's showing that on average, we have somewhere around 250 people known to us experiencing homelessness, any degree of homelessness in the city and county. And so that's kind of the information we share with our high level home team. That's kind of our decision-making group, like supervisors, directors, that kind of thing. And then the next piece that we look at, we have a new thing called an improvement table, which actually is going to be meeting for the first time today. So our improvement table, the role of that table is to dig into each of those buckets and split them apart as much as possible. And so what I've shown here on the screen is kind of how those things are divided up. So for example, when we look at the move to inactive bucket, we try to divide that up into 3 pieces. How many people actually moved to inactive because they left town? How many people move to inactive because they no longer meet the definition of chronic homelessness, and then how many become inactive, either due to lack of updates or due to passing away. And then when we look at our inflow buckets, that's when we divide it into people who are brand new to our system, we're meeting them for the first time, or people who we've known for a while that are just meeting the definition of chronic homelessness for the first time within this month. And then when we looked at our return to inactive bucket, we'll be digging into whether or not people are returning from being out of town, whether or not they're meeting the definition of chronic homelessness again after a period of not meeting that definition, and then whether or not we're just receiving new information, essentially getting back in touch with people that we lost touch with. And then there's also a column for data clean, and that's just if we have like duplicates and hyphus and that kind of thing. So our improvement table is a small group of people in our system that were interested and volunteered to participate. Again, we're meeting for the first time today, and we'll be meeting for half an hour every single week. And we're just going to try and pick an area. And again, I don't know how it's going to work out. I have a lot of optimism about it. My colleague Jocelyn, who's also on the call, is pretty excited, and we're going to be hoping that this group can help dig into those numbers and come up with some ideas from an operational perspective of how we can impact change. And so one of the first numbers we're going to be looking at is our return from housing number for July of 2020, because we all acknowledge that that number was particularly high. And so that's just how that group is going to go. It's not going to be super structured. We're just going to do what we can and look into the different data and try and see what we can sort of spitball together. So that's going to be happening weekly, and we're hoping to see some interesting things come out of that. So one of the things we did for a broader community, because obviously that kind of information is quite complex and we don't necessarily want to give it out to everybody until we know what we're trying to say. So in the fall and winter of 2020, we did a 6-week education campaign where we developed some fact sheets on 6 different topics relating to homelessness. And then we tweeted those out and shared them on our social media, and they're now available on our website. So I can share the link if anyone wants to check that out. But essentially each one of those fact sheets goes over a different overall topic as a way to try and educate the community on those. It's got some stats in it, not a ton, but it does have something to kind of ground people in those subjects and help set the stage for what started happening just in 2020. So starting in January 2020, we are now putting out a report card every month that goes through the buckets essentially. And so we're mentioning the total homeless number, the number of people experiencing chronic homelessness within that, and then the data points within that, and providing a very brief high-level description of what we think those mean. And we're planning on putting that out every single month. We haven't put it out on social media yet, but it is available on our website. And so we're hoping that that is a way to help the community understand the scale of homelessness that we're experiencing in Peterborough City and County. Jocelyn and I had a phone call with some of the upper management within the city, and they were quite surprised because we didn't realize that we've been talking so much about chronic homelessness that people were kind of forgetting that there is a whole nother group. There is a whole nother section of people that haven't met that definition yet, but are still very much experiencing homelessness. And so that unintended consequence of not letting people know the full picture is that the emergency shelters were constantly full, even though we were seeing positive impact towards our chronic homelessness numbers. So they're like, why is chronic homelessness going down, but the shelters are always full? So we had to revisit that and be like, oh yeah, well, we kind of forgot to tell you there's a lot, not a lot, I mean, there is a lot, there's more people experiencing homelessness than just the chronic number that we talked about. So we're hoping that this report card helps inform people a bit more, inform the broader community and people who are, you know, an arm's length away from the homelessness system who don't understand this kind of thing. And one really cool thing that I'll share before I pass it on to the next panelist is that our amazing, wonderful graphics person, Melanie, put together an interactive report card using something called Genially. And I have no idea how she did it. It's just pure magic. I understand that there is a free version of this software, but you can essentially create a report card, and that's what you can see in the top right-hand side of my slide. So it has graphs, and when you hover over graphs, things pop up. You can click on it and words pop up, and you can turn pages, and it's like reading the report card in a much more fun and interactive way. I don't know how she did it. I don't know anything else about it, but it's absolutely amazing. So I would encourage you that if you have any capacity to build like infographics and that kind of thing, to check out Genially. It's difficult to say, but I hope it's easy to use anyway. It is super cool. And again, I will share the links to those documents that we've created, and that just kind of covers what we're trying to do to use the data to encourage positive change in our system and also help inform the broader community.
That's amazing, Erin. Thank you so much. I am really excited to go check out your interactive report card and check out that tool, because I love new tools all the time. So yeah, if you can drop that in the chat, that would be amazing. Okay, and now I am going to pass it over to Dominica. I love that, you know, Erin showed a little bit of how they're starting to break apart the different data points, which I think that Dominica is going to pick up on that as well and talk about how they did that in Guelph. So I will pass it over to you, Dominica.
Thanks, Randalin. So hi, everyone. I'm going to try and plow through this so that we still have some time to touch base or do final things at the end. It was really amazing to hear from Chris and Erin about all the incredible work that you're doing in your communities, and just kudos for all the incredible things that you're doing. It's really great to hear about those examples. So hi, everyone. As mentioned, I'm Dominica, and I work for the Guelph and Wellington Task Force for Poverty Elimination. And we support local action in our community and do advocacy for on system and policy change to really address the root causes of issues like housing and homelessness. With that, we work really closely with the County of Wellington, who leads our Communities Built for Zero efforts and also administers our coordinated access and by name list in our community. Our community first developed a by name list in April 2016, and we achieved a quality by name list 2 years later in April 2018. And since, we've been leveraging that data to drive our decision making and improvements in our efforts to end homelessness. So more recently, we've used that data from our by name list to support action on our community's need for permanent supportive housing. And as I'm sure is the case in many of your communities, Guelph Wellington has a critical need for permanent supportive housing for individuals experiencing homelessness with high acuity or complex needs. So I'm going to share some slides and just see if it works here. All right, and I think you can see that. Okay, so, and in saying that, so our community's really been talking about our need for permanent supportive housing for some time, but have really struggled to kind of take action on that issue. But over the past couple of years, there's been renewed momentum in our community around this need, with increased advocacy and increased interest from elected officials. And at the time, our community was also seeing noticeable reductions in homelessness as a result of this work. And it was becoming increasingly clear that if we wanted to really reach our goal of fully ending homelessness, that we would need permanent supportive housing. So to support action on this issue, we were able to leverage some leadership from the Mayor of Guelph, who had launched a task force at the time of key players, including all levels of government and local leaders. And included a number of key players, and our organization was luckily in a unique position to kind of support our community's planning on this work. And naturally, we looked at our data really deeply to inform what those efforts look like. So just some examples here of how we created understanding around that. So naturally, an important part of this work was looking at the data to inform planning. And as we all know, one of the benefits, invaluable benefits of the BNL is real-time data that we can capture and the in-depth experience, understanding of what experiences look like in our community. But one of the challenges is communicating that complexity to community leaders. But it is possible, and in our work we've used things like infographics and charts and visualizations to build that understanding. But time and time again, all people wanted in our community is what is the exact number of permanent supportive housing units we need to meet this need in our community. So as many of you know who have by name lists, there is no definitive number because your by name list fluctuates and your inflow and outflow from homelessness does as well. So we really tried to recommend not setting on a specific number, but naturally it was a sticking point, and our solution to that was digging deeper to demonstrate a stronger understanding of what need looked like. So with this in mind, I reached out to Randalin, who I think it's really important to say has played an incredibly pivotal role in developing our community's by name list and co-leading our community's efforts to end homelessness in Guelph Wellington with the County of Wellington when she previously worked for the Poverty Task Force. So I am filling some big shoes in our community. And reached out to Randalin to hire her as a consultant to support a data dive into the by name list and get a better understanding of our permanent supportive housing need. So we started this by looking at experiences of on the by name list in terms of comparing mid and low acuity individuals to high acuity individuals. And we did this over a 21-month period. So looking at these experiences since our community had quality data. And we looked at a couple specific indicators. So the first one we looked at, because we did know that on a consistent basis, we had a higher number of high acuity individuals in our community than low to mid. So with that in mind, we dug in. So we looked first at the move-in rate. So looking at the number of move-ins from the current month divided by the number of active homeless individuals from the previous month. We also looked at the average rate of returns to homelessness from housing, being the number of returns from housing from the current month divided by the number of individuals who were housed the previous month. And essentially what we learned from that was that the move-in rate for high acuity individuals was slightly higher than mid and low acuity individuals, which was great. It meant that what we were doing in our community was working. But then the other thing we also learned is that we saw a more significant difference in the rate of returns to homelessness from housing, where we saw that the majority of returns to homelessness from housing in our community were high acuity individuals, which led us to believe that housing that was currently available may not be meeting individuals' needs. And the last thing I'll just mention here is, as I said, we didn't want to settle on a definitive number. We wanted to make sure that our community would keep going until everyone had a place to meet their needs. But one of the things we did do to keep momentum and interest by elected officials in our community was show regular snapshots of our by name list and gain a greater understanding of high acuity needs. So we were able to look at things like the number of high acuity individuals on the by name list and speak to all of those individuals should be considered for some form of permanent supportive housing, while also acknowledging the importance of choice and that we should honor that in individuals' agencies and what kind of housing they want and need. And then we did a bit of a deeper dive into looking at the greater complexity around that. So we knew that 29 individuals at the time had significant challenges in finding and maintaining housing, because in that period, they had either returned from homelessness from housing at least twice or were homeless for 80% of that time or more. And we knew that those individuals would likely need greater support. And then the last thing we looked at was the remaining 59 individuals who we also knew would need some type of support, but likely didn't need as significant of support as the 29 individuals that we had acknowledged. So with that in mind, we were able to really push conversations with not just elected officials and key players in the homeless serving system in our community, but we were also able to get significant players in health to join the conversation and think really intentionally about the health needs and the supports that would be paired with supportive housing projects in our community. And it was having this data that really allowed us to support those conversations. And just lastly, I'll stop sharing my screen here, but I think the last thing I just want to highlight is really looking at this data was pivotal and key to getting the buy-in that we needed from so many key players to really tackle an issue not only as complex as homelessness, but permanent supportive housing in particular, when you need so many different sectors coming together to take action. So I'm going to wrap up and I'll hand it back over to Randalin.
Thank you, Dominica, and our other panelists as well. Sorry, I'm trying to get on here because we're running short on time. And I want you folks to have the email addresses of our panelists in case you want to follow up with them and ask questions. They shared some incredible work that just is really the tip of the iceberg, and I'm sure that they would all be happy to chat with you further. Before you go, I have one more poll that I would be very grateful if folks could complete before they leave today. And again, thank you all for joining us today. And thank you very, very much to our panelists for sharing all of their wisdom. I hope you take a minute to just fill out that poll before you head out and have a wonderful Tuesday. I'm pretty sure it's Tuesday. Have a great Tuesday. Thanks, everyone.